Hello, everyone. This class we will talk about the myth of hypnotic trance. And this is our Learn Hypnosis from Scratch free course on YouTube every week, at least one new lesson. And this is already our third lesson. If you haven't watched the previous lessons yet, go back and watch them before continuing because this lesson builds on concepts that I have already introduced to you. Well, let's explore the concept of hypnosis without trance and the concept of hypnotic loops. These concepts are essential if you want to become a great hypnotist. But before we start talking about hypnotic loop, if you, by the way, don't know me, I am Alberto Dell'Isola. I have one of the biggest YouTube channels on hypnosis in Portuguese here on YouTube with more than 400,000 subscribers. But now I decided to restart all over again in English. So hope you understand my English. This is not AI. This is me with all mistakes and pronunciation errors. But hope you understand and please subscribe. Click the like button. Well, let's talk about the hypnotic loop. Well, the idea of hypnotic trance is almost inseparable from the phenomenon of hypnosis. Nearly every definition of hypnosis, including some academic definitions, associates hypnosis with a kind of altered state of consciousness. At least, at least, they associate hypnosis with a way of the conscience being, a different way of the consciousness. And this connection of hypnosis and altered state of consciousness has deep historical roots. Before it was called hypnosis, the practice of hypnosis was known as animal magnetism, the theory proposed by Mesmer in the 18th century. Mesmer believed in the existence of an invisible fluid that could be manipulated to produce effects on the human body. During these practices, intense phenomena were observed, ranging from convulsive crises to states of deep relaxation. This contributed to the belief that something special, something altered, was taking place in the subject's mind. It was in this context that the Marx de Puysegur made a decisive discovery that changed hypnosis forever. Using techniques that were different from the techniques used by Mesmer, because Mesmer used tubes, metals, and various forms of sensory stimulation, Puysegur used something different. Instead, he began using what were known as magnetic passes. The hand moving around the person to change the energy, let the energy flow from the magnetizer to the subject. And while magnetizing a peasant named Victor Reis, he observed a state completely different from the crisis that was described by Mesmer. The subject remained calm, apparently asleep, yet retained the ability to speak, to understand, to interact. Puysegur called this phenomenon waking sleep, which later became known as artificial somnambulism. This is one of the reasons why, even today, many hypnotists use the term somnambulism to refer to a deep level of hypnosis. Bernheim did this, Davy Ellman as well. And Pusiger described a series of characteristics associated with this state. According to him, during the waking sleep, the magnetized individual appears asleep while maintaining the ability to speak. They carry out the will of the magnetizer irresistibly. They hear and respond exclusively to the magnetizer. They display changes in personality. They demonstrate enhance, enhanced intellectual performance. They exhibit heightened sensory acuity. They appear to possess a sixth sense, including the ability to perceive the interior of their own body, diagnose illnesses, and predict the progression of disease. In addition, they experience spontaneous amnesia after the state ends. And even today, spontaneous amnesia is recognized as a phenomenon that can occur as a result of hypnosis. If you are familiar with Spiritism, which originated in France and later became extremely popular in Brazil, you have probably heard of the mediums. The idea of people channeling spirits or possessing paranormal abilities is historically connected to magnetic somnambulism. Allan Kardec himself, considered the father of Spiritism and Spiritism in Brazil, wrote a lot about magnetism. But years later, the Scottish physician James Braid became one of the key figures responsible for breaking away from the theory of animal magnetism. He abandoned, he abandoned the idea of an invisible fluid as the cause of hypnotic phenomena and began to recognize that hypnotic effects were directly related to the role of suggestion. Hypnotic effects were connected to the subject's attention, engagement, and participation in the process. However, Braid still maintained the notion that these effects occurred within a mental condition distinct from the ordinary waking consciousness, a particular state of the nervous system, a state that would later become strongly associated with what we call now hypnotic trance. And that connection remains incredibly strong to this day, not only among the general public, not only in popular culture, but even among many practitioners of hypnosis. However, there is an inconvenient truth. Hypnotic trance and hypnosis and hypnotic phenomena are very distinct phenomena. They are different things. They often occur together. I would even say that one can really enhance the other, but they remain separate and independent phenomena. When you begin hypnotizing people, you will notice that some individuals display excellent signs of hypnotic trance. They show classic physiological changes, altered breathing patterns, deep relaxation, eyelids fluttering. The eyelids fluttering is a very classical physiological state from hypnosis. Deep relaxation, Yet, despite all this trance physiology, many of these people do not respond particularly well to suggestions, even when they appear to be in a very, very deep trance. And we can also find the opposite. People who display virtually no trance physiology and yet are highly hypnotized. Sometimes they even appear to be pretending, but they are not. They are really hypnotized. When hypnosis appears to fail and suggestions do not work, hypnotists often blame a shallow level of trance. But that's not true. The effectiveness of hypnosis depends far more on other factors. Letting go of the obsession with hypnotic trance will make you a much better hypnotist. I'll say again, if you let go this obsession with hypnotic trance, levels of trance, you will be a much better hypnotist. And I can assure you of that. In this course, instead of thinking in terms of levels of trance, we will think in terms of levels of perceptual change. And these levels can be understood through a concept called the hypnotic loop. I consider the hypnotic loop to be the single most important concept in the practice of hypnosis. When I first became a hypnotist, I was still attached to the ideas of trance deepening, trance physiology. In fact, many of my older videos in Portuguese discuss hypnotic deepening extensively. But over time, I became convinced that trance itself is not what causes suggestions to work. But over time, I became convinced that trance itself is not what causes suggestions to work. Learning about the hypnotic loop completely transformed my practice. And listen, this is not merely a theoretical issue. The concept that I'm going to show you is important for the practice of hypnosis. That's not only a theoretical thing. And the concept was developed by the renowned hypnotist James Tripp. He has a YouTube channel in English, very good, go there. And I consider it's the best, at least the best simple explanation for the phenomenon of hypnosis. An interesting detail is that virtually every experienced hypnotist understands this concept, at least implicitly. James Tripp just came up with the name. But as we always say, obvious obvious things must be said. And what's exactly the hypnotic loop? The hypnotic loop is a circular process, a feedback cycle consisting of four elements: belief, imagination, physiology, and experience. These are the four fundamental components: belief, imagination, physiology, and experience. Together, they sustain what we call hypnotic phenomena. They allow hypnotic phenomena to emerge, and they allow one hypnotic phenomena to become another one. And the process is very simple. Beliefs drives our imagination alters our physiology, and our physiological responses create experiences, new experiences that confirm and strengthen the beliefs, and the cycle then begins again. As a hypnotist, your job is to facilitate the creation of these loops. And more importantly, to help them become self-sustaining. You are there to create hypnotic loops and help them continue operating on their own. Let me give you an example. It seems complicated, but with example, it's very simple to understand. You have probably seen this classic stuck hands exercise. The person let the fingers cross like this, usually put above the head or just in front of their heads. This is one of the most common demonstrations in hypnosis, one of the most common suggestibility tests for stage hypnosis. And it's frequently used in stage hypnosis shows. And the hypnotist says something like this: imagine your hands are completely stuck together. I'm going to count from 1 to 5, and only on 5 you try to separate them, but you won't be able to. 1, 2, more stuck, 3, 4, even more stuck, 5, try to release them, try to release them, try to release them. And many people genuinely cannot release their hands. Why? Because of the loop. First, there is physiology. When we place our hands in this position, there is already a natural physical tension. Arises certain physiological factors that make the separation of the hands more difficult. But that's not only that. Because that physiology creates an experience. The person feels that their hands seem somewhat stuck. That experience feeds belief. And they begin to believe that their hands are really stuck together. And this belief fuels our imagination. And the imagination alters physiology. Again, that is small difficulty, that is small physiological difficulty, now it's much stronger because of the way the imagination is altering physiology. Unconsciously, the person begin pressing their hands together even more, and their hands become increasingly stuck, and the cycle strengthens. It gets more strength. One experience reinforces the next. One loop feeds another. A skilled hypnotist can make this process sustain itself. You have probably noticed that hypnotists often keep saying, try to separate them, try to release, try to separate them. They are reactivating the loop. They are reactivating imagination. They don't let the person imagine something different. And in a moment, that hands will be completely stuck because the loop is self-perpetuating. In the moment, the process starts operating on its own without any further input from the hypnotist. So when someone cannot separate their hands in this exercise, it's not simply because of physiology. Physiology was just a starting point, one of the entry points of the hypnotic loop. Hypnotizing someone is essentially about placing them inside the loop and keeping them there inside the loop until it becomes self-perpetuating. And once a person has mentally cycled through that loop several times during a simple exercise, like this one of the hands stuck, it becomes much easier for them to forget their name. You can just, after the loop is working for itself, you can just create a new loop. saying that the name is gone or that the number 7 is gone, that the person has amnesia. That's precisely why stage hypnosis shows begin with simple phenomena and gradually progress to more complex ones. And listen, using nothing more than hypnotic loop, it's possible to produce hallucinations. The person sticks their hands together, close their eyes, the eyes get stuck, and then a new loop, they forget the name, they forget numbers. Then the hypnotist says, when you open your eyes, I'll snap my fingers. You will see me wearing a different shirt, perhaps the shirt of a famous soccer player, and the person really sees it. This is why the idea that such phenomena only occur because the person is a deep altered state of consciousness or very deep trance is very incorrect. You can do this during the regular state of consciousness. Now, it's important to clarify something. Can hypnosis produce altered states of consciousness? Absolutely. Just as meditation, without question. But that altered state is a product of hypnosis. It's not the core mechanism that allows hypnosis to occur or to be maintained. Another important point, in the stuck hands example, we initiate the loop through physiology. But as I said, the loop can begin at any of the 4 states. Imagine someone who's extremely excited about being hypnotized. Someone who has watched many hypnosis videos. That person may begin the loop through belief. And this helps explain why many people can be hypnotized even while claiming they do not believe in hypnosis. Again, belief is only one of the possible entry points into the phenomenon. If the person imagines a lot what's happening, she can be hypnotized or he can be hypnotized, even if at that moment he or she doesn't believe. The way of thinking through hypnotic loops completely changes how I do hypnosis. Today, I'm constantly looking for opportunities to establish hypnotic loops in the person's mind until eventually those loops begin working for itself in an independent way. I call this stabilization of the hypnotic phenomenon. Once the loop is running autonomously, I can identify where to intervene to make it even more powerful. I can modify it, I can create new loops, generate new experiences, produce even stronger hypnotic phenomena. And when I went to end hypnosis, I simply break the loop. In therapeutic sessions, we often create loops that remain open even after the session ends. This is why I want you to understand that the hypnotic loop is not merely a theoretical model. This is a practical tool, a guide for the hypnotist to work. Act directly upon physiology. When we use relaxation induction, we are activating the loop through physiology. The same is true about altered states of consciousness. The same is true about trance. When the person notices these changes, physiology strengthens the loop, and that amplifies hypnotic phenomena. That is why inductions remain so important. But I want you to understand something that's very important. An induction works because it establishes or strengthens a hypnotic loop, not because it creates trance. Think with me. If the hypnotic trance was really needed to make suggestions to work, how would the induction work? Because at the beginning, there is no state. So there are suggestions, inductions that must happen before the hypnotic trance. So inductions are important because they help to build expectancy, expectation. They help build the hypnotic loop, strengthens it, not because it creates trance. The loop doesn't require trance in order to function, but the loop itself can generate trance. And of course, trance, if the person has the trance, that can build hypnotic loop too. Someone, for example, in a meditative practice can be hypnotized because of the sensation of the hypnotic trance. And when that happens, trance can further enhance hypnotic phenomena. I hope you like this lesson. Every week we release free lessons on YouTube. And remember to meet James Tripp on his YouTube channel, as it's in English. It's easy to you to understand. By the way, his English is much better than mine, as that's not my first language. Hope you understood my English. Leave your comments and see you next class.